Well, as I said, thank you very much everybody for being here. I'm Richard Walters. I'm from a company called Commendium over in the United Kingdom. And as I said before, we don't sell software, we don't sell scanners, we don't sell anything really apart from the services that we give. So I'm using some example here of scanning some of the world's largest caves to illustrate some of the problems that you find in scanning, and indeed some of the problems that we're finding with modern software that we use to process the images, and hopefully that'll be nice and helpful. But first of all, let me give you a little bit of a background. Basically, the world's largest caves are extremely large. And by caves here, I'm meaning caverns, rooms within caves. Just to give you some idea, this building that you're in and all 6 halls, all 6 halls of these buildings would easily fit inside most of the caverns that I'm going to be talking about. They are vast in size. Just to give you some familiarity, we all know how big a football pitch is. We might not like football, but we have some idea of how big a football pitch is. The world's largest cavern by area is Sarawak Chamber in Mulu, and that's how big it is compared to a football pitch. It is absolutely enormous. To give you some idea, the inside volume of the football stadium here in Stuttgart, the Mercedes-Benz Stadium, is just short of 1 million cubic meters. And yet here is a chamber, completely natural space underground, formed by water, that is nearly 10 million cubic meters in size. They are absolutely vast. So what's it like? Well, to give you some idea, is it claustrophobic? Well, actually, funnily enough, it is strangely claustrophobic because your lights don't show up the walls. You can't see where you're going until you switch on a light, or indeed power on a laser scanner so you can start to appreciate the formation of these caverns properly. And the great revolution for us in exploring caves is the laser scanner, which has enabled us to model these caves in enormous accuracy. Never done these before. Just in case you can't see, there are specks on here. I haven't got a pointer. There's a man, and in fact even on this screen the 1 pixel of a man somewhere there in the distance is actually lost on you. They are very big places indeed. This particular chamber is just the bottom end of the world's largest chamber, which is in China. It's called the Mouse Room. And it's just over 1 kilometer long. It's 300 meters wide in its widest point, and it's almost 300 meters high. As you can see, taking laser scanners into these places can be quite difficult. There's lots of boulders. Laser scanners are generally pretty heavy. Certainly the ones that you want to have that have got the range to reach up into the roofs and all the nooks and crannies. So it's pretty hard work carting this stuff around. It's also, it's more akin to mountaineering than traditional caving. We rarely have to squeeze or thrust through low passages in all of this stuff, but as you can see, we gain great heights as we walk through these caverns and scramble through these caverns. So it's all pretty hard work. So the first sort of thing that we're interested in a scanner is portability. Portability is really, really crucial to us. But actually, the single most difficult thing that we have when using this stuff in the field is power. Batteries really are heavy, and carting the batteries around is what causes us the biggest headaches. Not only because of their weight, but also when you're flying to one of these places, the airlines increasingly don't like batteries. And although they are legal according to IATA rules, the poor little people on the checkout counters don't like us taking large batteries in our hand luggage, and we don't want to lose them in our hold luggage. So it does cause quite a lot of issues. So batteries is another issue for us to deal with. Just as a little aside, where are these caves? People often ask me. Well, funnily enough, they're not only in the exotic places such as China and Mexico and Belize and Borneo, where I'm off to next week, but they're also in the Pyrenees. One of the 7th largest chamber in the world, which I shall illustrate to you, is probably only 300 or 400 kilometers from where we are now in the Pyrenees. Sorry if I've got my distances a little bit wrong, but it's really not very far away. So what are we using? We use a Regal VZ400. The reason why we use it is because it is portable. You can lug it around. It's still 9-10 kilos. It is a heavy load. We use the Riscan Pro software, and we particularly like the fact that when you've got lots of different scans, that software allows us to very efficiently and quickly stitch them all together. That works extremely well. We like that. It does have its little niggles every now and again, and it gets things wrong, so to say that it's automatic, no, it isn't. There are little bits and pieces you've got to go in, and you've got to check things and make sure the right places have stitched together with the right places, etc. So there is a little, it's not completely perfect, but generally speaking, it's pretty damn good software. We then export that to something called Reshaper, 3D Reshaper from Hexagon, which is a product we like. And the reason why we do that is it has the best and most accurate volume calculations, because one of the things we're really interested in is the volume of these caves, of any software that we have so far found. It's pretty intuitive, it's got its problems, and I'll come back to those in a minute, but we do like using that as well. We also use Bentley point tools to create some additional fly-throughs and things like that, and that all works pretty well. There are other pieces of software out there that we use from time to time. Cloud Compare, which is a free software that you can download off the internet. The guy that wrote it is clearly very, very intelligent, but his user guide is awful. Absolutely awful. And you do struggle sometimes to find your way through it and find out the bits and pieces that you need to be able to do the jobs that you do. NetFab we use for printing, almost exclusively for printing, and that's also pretty good. And then we use Mesh Labs and Photoshop, Adobe Photoshop, to tidy bits and pieces up as we go. There's a typical setup in a very large chamber of us working. One of the reasons why we like the Regal is it is absolutely superb in grotty conditions. I mean, here's a chamber actually in the UK, and you can see it's right next to a big waterfall. Although the scanner was completely wet, everything was soaking, we still got a decent point cloud out of it that we were able to process. It's not as good as one, of course, that we would have liked if the conditions had been completely dry, but we certainly did get a completely usable point cloud with which we could model our caves. And I'd like to just add a point here. I think one of the things where I'm coming from as a group of people in my company is our particular unique thing about scanning, and what we bring is we can go places other people can't go. We've been in ice, we've been on cliffs, we've been dangling off buildings in strange places, we've been in nuclear power stations. We are very good at getting to places where you just can't get any other way other than on your own 2 feet. Or indeed, most of the time, on your own 2 knees, of course, it being caving. Let's just look a little bit at the process. When we're underground, it's all fairly straightforward. You'll be pretty familiar with this, I'm sure. We need to find a setup station. We do a quick scan. We do a quick overview, make sure everything's working, make sure we haven't got any problems. Then we do a scan with a fairly long range, and then a quick check to eliminate all the problems, make sure everything's happening. And then we might see some special features that the geologist wants to scan in a little bit more detail. We might do that, so we might do another one. But the key thing about this is we have to back up our data before we move. You've seen what the caves are like. Yeah, the caves are tricky. They're difficult. It's easy to fall over. Most of us fall over at some stage or another during a caving trip. It's not particularly dangerous or anything, but we're carrying 100,000 euros worth of scanning equipment. So we have to back up before every move, and that takes time, but more importantly, it takes power, and that drains the amount of time that we can spend underground doing our scanning. Yep. The process we use, I've actually touched on this a little bit already. We use Riscan Pro to do our stitching and our multi-station adjustment. Then we export to universal point cloud format. We have found that LAS is the most universally easy one to everyone will use. I'd love to hear some comment on that later if anyone's got some comments, to see if there are any other opinions about better ones, but certainly so far we have found LAS to be the best. We use 3D Reshaper extensively, tidying up meshes, corrections, calculations, and producing some videos, and point tools we use for videos, and NetFab for printing, as I've mentioned already. The end result might look something like this. And this is a schematic that was drawn up by an artist in the National Geographic, the famous exploring magazine, based on our data to give people and the readers of the magazine some idea about what the cave's like. As you can see, they've put a jumbo jet in the corner of the cave there to give you some idea of scale. Interestingly, the big stalactite that you can see here, it looks relatively small here, is only a few meters shorter than the big radio tower that you can see in Stuttgart, just out one of these windows of this hall already today. So they really are very big. Okay, we then have actually gone on to do some animations. We use the 3D reshaper for this. But we also, before we go into 3D reshaper, we tend to use Photoshop to patch things up, to match photographs well, and to highlight particular features as we're moving through the cave to make them show up better. And we find these a very, very useful tool in determining and helping people to understand what these caves are really, really like. Okay, just let that one run while I catch my breath. Okay, so you can see, when I swap over to the stills, you can see the scale of people in these places to give you some idea of how big they are. I'll tell you a funny story here. Of course, it's fairly hard work walking through all these caves. You get hot, you get sweaty, you get tired, and you're not quite sure of where the way on is because you can't see past the boulders. And we put our scanner down, our 100,000 euro piece of equipment down to go and find the way on. And it took us 5 hours to find it again. So it was a few heart-stopping moments on that trip. But you can see how large these caves are. The cave at this point is probably around about 300 meters high and probably about 200 meters wide. And you can see what it's like moving across the floor here, big boulders, big drops and things like that, even though there are no actual narrow passages or anything to squeeze through that people often associate with going caving. There's that big stalagmite again, roughly the height of the big telecommunications tower in Stuttgart, and this is the largest part of the chamber. I'm going to move on because I'm getting short of time. Yeah, this is another cave which actually we had some really curious results from. So this is inside the main chamber, and that caver there is lighting up another caver who's abseiling in from the top of the chamber. They found another passage at the top which broke out into the roof of this chamber. And that abseil, that single rappel or abseil from the opening into the chamber is 270 meters single drop. Yeah, that's quite a height. But even then, in the early days when we were exploring this cave, until we came to survey the cave with a laser scanner, we still didn't appreciate how big it was. And in fact, the true height of the chamber turned out to be 365 meters, and with a volume of 6 million cubic meters, and now pretty universally recognized as the third largest chamber in the world. Interestingly, we found another. This particular chamber gave us the opportunity to use our Regal and actually scan and survey around some loops so we could get some closure errors. And we were getting closure errors in distances of around about 3 or 4 kilometers of less than 4 centimeters, which I think you can say is pretty good. Very, very happy with that. But again, you saw briefly from some of those pictures, it's hard work doing this stuff. Interestingly, here's another one. This is a slightly different approach. We're taking the software and looking at the caves in a different way. This is good old Google Maps. I like Google Maps. It works very well. And this is another very large cave in Spain, again, not too far away from us, called Torre de la Calista. And the particular name of the room is the Gran Sala con Harana. Now, this particular cave has actually been known for a very long time. 50, 60 years it's been known and been explored. And it sits in an innocent little hillside just south of Bilbao in northern Spain. And this is roughly what the terrain looks like. It's fairly sort of typical of northern Spain, fairly mountainous. But what you wouldn't necessarily appreciate just walking by is that right underneath your feet is this enormous void. And interestingly, the survey here has been used locally both to see about the connection to a show cave that's called Pozalagua, where we showed with a surveying that this was only going to be about just short of 20 meters apart. But also we were able to show how close this huge void was to the surface. Again, 3D scanning techniques here really showed this up very, very clearly. This particular software is using 3D reshaper. Like it, I've left the logo there. I'm very, very pleased with this software, generally speaking. It does, however, in common with most of the post-processing software that we have experienced, it does have one single big flaw. And that is, to get this images right, and I'm quite sure somebody more skilled in 3D Reshaper could make a better job of it than I've done here. I'm quite convinced of that, quite openly admit that. But you experiment all the time with the parameters and the settings and the resolutions all the time to get the best thing that you can get out of it. Wouldn't it be nice if the software recorded the settings that you've actually used, yeah, so that you could then export those settings and use them again at another time? Wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't that be incredibly helpful? Anyway, there's a tip for you software developers out there. A little thing that would be incredibly useful. Yeah, because most people, especially when you go out there and try and sell this stuff to the wider markets, I think it's going to start happening. Is this software is not easy to use, so everything that you can do to make it easier to use is going to help your sales. Surely, it's going to help your sales. I love this feature within 3D Reshaper to get contours. Absolutely superb. Really help us to illustrate the cave very, very clearly and what's exactly going on. Let's move on. I mentioned a cave earlier on called Laverna in France, and this is a very poor, I'm not very proud of this, but it'll give you an idea, video, again using 3D Reshaper, inside the cave. And again, we've slotted some cavers here. These cavers were actually scanned using Agisoft, and as you can see, it's worked quite well for this purpose. But just to give you an idea of how big they are, there's a caver coming up on the wall over there, just a thin dot at the moment, sitting on a ledge, enjoying himself, probably having a sandwich, waiting for us to do our work. I haven't done this in particularly high resolution at the moment. It's just a quick job for the purposes of this this conference. But you can start to see what these places are really like. Incidentally, you can all go and visit this one. It's a show cave. Yeah, it's in the Pyrenees towards the Spanish, the hook, where we call that, San Sebastian, Biarritz, that corner of the Pyrenees. And it's a show cave. Everyone can go in and see it for a few francs, and it's well worth it if you're there with your kids and your family or just visiting the area. Really, really nice place to go. So the results of all this, yeah, are a list. Yeah, the ones in purple are the ones we've actually surveyed. The ones that are not highlighted, we have yet to do. And the reason why I've got Cloud Ladder Hall has traditionally been in 5th position. Our results have shown that it's almost certainly actually going to be the third biggest cave, third biggest cavern in the world. It's just I haven't quite had the courage to move it to 3rd yet, because let's face it, and let's give them a chance, I haven't surveyed the other 2 yet. So that's basically where we are. Okay. So, from a point of view of where we are, where my company is and what my company's strength is we can take your scanning places that other people, drones, UAVs, whatever, just simply can't get to. You can't fly a UAV around a chamber because you can't see well enough to know that you're not going to fly it into a wall. And if it does fall out of the sky or get run out of power, it will take you days to find it because you'll just lose it. We're also, very good in wet and cold conditions and things like that. We're very prepared to go there. We're also very prepared to go to places that are very, very hot. So we've done ice, we've done mountains, we've done cliffs. Just scanned a cliff in the Lake District where I come from in Lake District, which is falling down. And nobody wanted to go anywhere near it because nobody could get anywhere near it safely. We were able to do that. So if you want to go somewhere difficult, give us a call.